Hey, welcome to the Sales Squad Pod, the show that breaks down the skills sellers need to crush quota and advance their career. Hosted by Lisa, a top enterprise AE, Sarita, a frontline leader, and Donna, a former leader of leaders. We met in the sales trenches at Salesforce. We're moms, we've carried a bag for decades, we've gone to club, and we've got you. If you're ready to uplevel your game and career, let's jump into it. Hey, Sales Squad Pod, it's Lisa Moscatelli, and I'm here joined by my co-hosts, Sarita and Donna. And today we've got a really fun show planned for you folks on what might not be the most fun topic. It's not so sexy. But you know what is sexy is commission checks. So if you don't know what we're talking about, it's mutual plans for us today. But don't worry, this isn't your 2023 mutual plan. This girl has been updated, and we're looking at our 2026 mutual plans and beyond. Who is this for? So this is for sellers and leaders. If you folks are looking to close complex deals, manage your external and internal communications, and just being known to hit your forecast when you say you will, today's episode is for you. So let's dive in. When I think about mutual plans, the way that I think about it is a good analogy is like flossing your teeth. So I think about flossing your teeth as something that no one is excited about. But everyone knows if you didn't do it because your breath stinks and your dentist is like, when's the last time you flossed? Or how often are you doing it? To me, mutual plans are really just that thing that needs to get done and might actually be part of the hardest part of sales. I don't know, Sarita, what's your take?
Yes, this is a big part. I feel like I have this conversation on a regular with my sales reps, specifically about mutual action plans, but I would say it's the organization behind it. That's the big thing when it comes to the difficulties of sales. It's how do I stay organized
Mhm.
as a seller, but also how do I also keep my clients, my customers, my prospects also organized? And this subject, I think, touches on all of those areas. So I'm excited to dive in.
Awesome. And Donna, one time we had a conversation, you talked about the key traits that you think about when you're hiring somebody, and you talked about operational excellence. Can you tell me how mutual success plans fit into operational effectiveness?
Sure. But before I do, I'm going to give you my take on your analogy because I love a good analogy and I love refining analogies. For me, it's not just flossing your teeth, it's actually brushing your teeth because a mutual close plan is that important. And it's that obvious when you don't have one because the stakes are high. And when you're not able to run through your deal cycle because you have no direction of where you're headed, it becomes so blatantly obvious. It's not just bad breath, it's you got crap in your teeth
Mm.
because you didn't brush. When I'm hiring reps, operational effectiveness is absolutely one of the key things that I look for. I think in an interview, especially, a lot of reps are successful, but they're not able to actually articulate why they are successful. And the key to this is understanding what your process is. What process can you repeat to not only have success once, but apply it to future deals? And so I think the mutual success plan is one component of a rep's process.
Mhm.
And if you can really hone in on the steps that you need to do within a deal cycle, then you can replicate it and then you could be more successful in the future. So I love this topic. And yes, I love when reps understand process and have a way forward that they're following.
It's a little bit tricky too because it doesn't matter what organization that you're speaking to. There are some key elements that are always going to come up, but it's always going to be like slightly different about how that organization actually works to close a deal. To me, the hardest part of sales is not actually getting to yes, it's like the herding of the cats afterwards. And so I always ask the business, tell me about your procurement process. Your business buyer doesn't purchase technology all the time, so they might not know the process. And this starts to open up like a couple holes here, right? Do they understand it? Do they know who's involved? Do they know the monetary values of who needs to be included once we get to a higher threshold? So I just like to start with that. And what that usually brings me to is chilling with procurement. So Sarita, how early do you ask your reps to bring procurement into deals?
As early as possible. The earlier, the better. And I think it's not just procurement because procurement, in my space, in the mid market space, sometimes procurement can be the same person who also handles the legal side, who also handles security. And it can be that shop where there's one person wearing multiple hats. And so a lot of the role is understanding who owns which part of the process And then how do I now map what each part of that process is and be able to have a timeline against it and understand how long each of those takes. So
Mhm.
for my reps, a lot of times it's reminding them that the mutual plans also don't have to be complete before you present this to your customer. This is the big part for me. A lot of times people get confused around, oh, I need to have this complete structure ready to go and I need to know every single step that's going to apply. That's actually not the case. You need to have a back and forth conversation with your person so they can fill in the gaps on those areas. And by the way, if they don't have an answer to be able to fill in the gaps, now you realize maybe this person is not actually my champion to be able to understand what steps need to happen. So the sooner you have this conversation, the better, because what you may find is, what if the procurement process is 1 or 2 months? Now you're in a situation where unless you know this, you're not going to be able to understand when your deal is actually going to close. So the sooner the better, whether it's procurement, whether it's legal, whether it's the security team, I mean, you name it, you need to be the one to present that, hey, here are what I typically see. These are some steps that I have seen in the past. Which ones apply and don't apply? And hey, can you help me get the answers to this? And let's work through this together. Hence, mutual being the important part of this conversation.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, oh my gosh, Sarita, there's so much to unpack in what you just said there. Three things really stick out to me. The first is you don't have to have everything prepared. In fact, if you do, it is no longer a mutual plan because they had no say in what has to happen in order for something to close. And then the second, I guess, sub point on that is if you have all of those steps, that would mean you know exactly how they procure in that organization. And that's just not true. The second piece is, hey, all those people might not know each other. And then the third piece that you said in there was you may not have a champion in whom you think is the champion. So I was taught at Salesforce always sell to the business. You need to bring the business in. The business is everything. And recently I have found that while the business is great on getting the yes, they're not necessarily my champion to close something. In fact, a deal that I'm closing right now, my biggest champion is an IT liaison who sits between the business and IT and procurement. And she's the one who is orchestrating everything on their end. And what I'm finding is as you go up market, these people start to exist a lot more. But we've got a lot to cover. I want to go through everything. And I want to start with a story on how I became kind of obsessed with the mutual plan. I was selling a multi-million dollar deal to a Fortune 10 company. And when you think about what are the big ticket items that you need to close a deal, we had all of them. I'm talking executive alignment. Our CEOs met. We had a compelling event. We knew end of year was coming. We had legal to legal calls. We had procurement in the deal. I was on a texting basis with procurement. Did they have budget? Yes. Did the deal close on time? No, it didn't. So, spoiler alert. Why did that happen? Because not everybody knew each other and it was herding the cats. What I want to talk about in number one of my mutual success plan is when does it start? And I don't actually think that a mutual success plan starts at the very beginning of the sale. I think it starts as the second sales cycle. It's once you get yes. So you get yes, you start to draw out the mutual success plan to say, how are we going to close this deal together? It's no longer you just saying, we did a demo, we did a discovery call. Like none of that stuff matters. You're not bringing any value to somebody to say, these are all the things that we did. This is the checklist. What you bring to your customer is these are the big ticket items that generally need to happen in order for a deal this size to close. Let's talk about them. One, procurement. What's your vendor onboarding? How do you run the deal? What do you sign at? Number two, legal. When is legal supposed to be involved? We've got an MSA that needs to be redlined. And coming into this new world, we've got DPAs, those data privacy agreements. Who owns the data? Where is the data stored? I always thought it was the MSA that was going to be the hardest thing to redline. The DPAs have just completely destroyed that notion for me. IT and security. So IT needs to be brought into this. If they're not brought in and security is not brought in, you're not going to close this deal. We work in SaaS. If there's AI components, they're going to want to hear about it. The fourth piece that I include is who is signing this deal? Who's actually the signer? Is procurement the signer? Is the business the signer? Is the CMO the signer? Does the board need to be involved? You need to find out who that is. And then number five, which is a new addition to the mutual plans that I've been putting together, is implementation. What this has done is really signified you need to sign on this date if you want to be implemented by X date. And we need to work on that together. Donna, a leader of leaders, is this something that you have seen, or what is it that you want to see?
So here's the thing. When you get into leadership, my exposure to the plan is going through the sales process and feeling the pain when there isn't one, or feeling the seamlessness when there is one. And when I ask the rep a question in a forecast call or in a deal review, and I say, what is the next step? They know what the next step is. The key here, especially as a leader trying to uncover, does the rep actually have a plan here, is asking the second and third question, going a level deeper, being curious. When the rep says, oh, the next step is they have a meeting at with the board. Okay. Who's presenting? What are they presenting? What are the objections they are prepared to handle? What are the potential roadblocks they are going to face coming out of that board meeting? And I think by asking your rep those questions, it trains them to be asking their champion those questions because they need answers internally. And obviously, we are not looking to be quiz masters and drill our customers. But that idea of being curious, don't just accept that the next step is a board meeting. Ask them about that meeting. Ask them why it's important. Ask them where they are in the process, what comes after that. So I think we as leaders need to train our sellers to get better at crafting those plans by asking curious questions.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot about what you said reminds me that the fact that because our sellers are selling this all day, every day, they also assume that the person on the other side purchases all day, every day. In my space specifically, I loved what you said earlier, Lisa, about like there's like a map to the paperwork. For us, we actually have two maps in place because we still need a map to the vendor of choice before we can even consider a map to the legal paperwork component and the signature component. We have a lot of steps to take before they actually say, yes, we do want you as our vendor. And then begins the second map, which is the one that you're talking about, which is more consistent on the enterprise side, where it's to the legal paperwork. And that seamlessness that you're talking about, Donna, it's very obvious when there isn't a map in place because I should be able to pick up exactly where you are. Let's say you're out on PTO, you're out on holidays. I should know exactly where we are and be able to essentially pick up, be a player coach, and just say, hey, I'm going to continue doing what we're doing because I know exactly what's been done so far. And I know exactly how to keep going and move the deal forward for you and help you in this space.
Yeah, Sarita. So the mutual action plan to get to the vendor of choice, for me, it's not mutual. We want to be the vendor of choice, but does the customer want us to be the vendor of choice? So I think about it as like a deal cycle. There's the deal cycle and the things that you need to do in order to get to yes. And then the mutual plan, it kicks in at the time that somebody says yes, because now they're like, yes, we want to close with you. And these are the resources that we're willing to put in place. Before that, it's an evaluation.
I like that. I like that.
Okay, cool. I mean, maybe that's a hot take. Maybe people are like, whoa, leaders everywhere are like, what? But to me, if we're going to use the word mutual, I do think that it needs to start at the time of yes. So let's dive into the steps. The first one's procurement. You will find very quickly if they are going to stiff arm you and say, no, you can't speak to those people. I will manage those conversations. Or these are the folks that we need to bring into our steering committee on how we're going to actually close this deal.
Sometimes where it gets even more complicated is when those people are actually outside of the organization. Sometimes you do have third party procurement, third party legal, third
Yeah.
party security. And that just adds an extra wrench into the conversation. But again, an even more important reason why this plan, or at least some sort of guidance around timelines, proficiency, how do we understand when and where, becomes even more important.
Yeah, I love that. And I do this all the time, but that is always a question that I ask when we are speaking to procurement. Where do these people reside? Are they internal? Are they external? So thank you for that. Right now I'm actually dealing with external procurement. They are in India and so responsive, but it's a 2 day. So like they'll send something to me at 3 o'clock in the morning. I send something back at like 8 a.m. That's 8 p.m. for them. So I hear the next day. So it's been a very slow process. So something to think about as you're creating these plans. Where do these people actually reside? That's a great point, Sarita. Thank you. Legal to legal. Legal loves to stay behind a screen. They love it. And one of the things now that we're talking about privacy data laws, I have found that it has been much easier to actually get legal on a legal to legal call. I always position folks,
In order to expedite this, I have found that when we put legal and legal on a call together who can speak their own language and we get out of their way, the data and the way that our company thinks about data is just expressed and provides so much more clarity that things start to move a lot faster. And procurement usually lets down their guard on that because I'm not saying I want to speak to your legal team. I'm saying our legal team has requested to speak to your legal team in order to provide some clarity before we move into red lines.
Now, I would say that it's interesting that you bring this up because for the mid-market space, a lot of times legal teams actually don't want to get on calls. They prefer making the red lines over email and as opposed to what my legal team calls it legal play dates. They don't want to have these types of conversations because it can sometimes get too much in the weeds and too muddied. Where we typically actually have a blurb that sort of explains an FAQs on what we typically get asked. So what I love about the mid-market space is it's pretty common across the board, the types of questions we get from the legal teams, especially when it comes to data and security. And so in this particular place, what I find really, really important is more the timeline for legal is actually what helps us to underline how long does it typically take legal to review documents? And then having the business side underline, this is the timeline that we need to get this done.
Yeah.
Unless those two are aligned, that's when we have more issues. And so for the mid-market space, it's more important to make sure to align on those timelines versus the actual legal piece because the FAQ docs help. And because a lot of the questions and the conversations are very similar, it actually allows us to skip the legal play dates and get a focus on just getting the red lines out and getting those done.
Yeah, I'm working with that right now where it took 4 weeks to get red lines back from external legal. And when we finally got them, we had said, like, there's still so much friction in here and so many things that we need to go through. Like, we can't rely on another 4 weeks. We don't have that time. And that's where the implementation component of the mutual plan really kicks in because I was able to point to that to say, if you folks want to be implemented by X date, and this is going to take another 4 weeks, like we're never going to hit. So IT security, this has been the area that has like blown up for me that I have just been like, wow, this is no longer an infosec check mark. With the rise of AI incorporated into so many solutions, I just find that people want to know so much more about where their data is going to go. So security teams are coming in and IT is saying, is this going to break my system or what access do you have to the other data that we have in our systems? And so I have a deal right now that we went through 5 security reviews. So 5 different security review boards and a 250 doc questionnaire that my solution engineer was amazing and filled out. But I was just blown away by we had to wait for 5 different review boards to get together and discuss our submissions. And each one of those was a 2 to 3 week wait that we were like, wow, this was not anticipated. I was so grateful for that person that I spoke about at the very beginning of this. We had asked procurement the question, is there someone who manages the security component in IT? And this person was brought up, and it was this business liaison person. So start asking, is there someone who sits between business and IT who will help facilitate these reviews? What do those reviews entail? Can they happen in parallel? Does it have to be one after the other? So all of these things you need to start asking. And Sarita, to your original point, like that could never be something that someone would be able to have a complete mutual plan. Those are questions that are going to differentiate for every organization.
I want to make one observation, which is that I find reps, their eyes can glaze over when it comes to legal or security reviews, and they don't get into the details. And I think this is a missed opportunity. When you are not reading the red lines and understanding why a client may have an issue with our take on warranties, if you don't take the time to understand from legal what our point of view is on that, then the next time it comes up, instead of being able to circumvent it and address it, you don't understand the problem. And then it becomes another review with legal and tete-a-tete between the two legal teams when it's something that maybe you could have articulated, hey, I've seen this in the past and here's how we've dealt with it. Same with security, data residency. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand why it matters? And what's your company's take on that? How do you approach data residency? I think as salespeople, we have to wear so many hats and we have to be educated on all elements of the business landscape in order to have articulate conversations with our customers and get those deals through more quickly. If we can just address at a high level, you don't need to be an expert, but you need to know where's your data. That's a pretty table stakes at this point. And I think the best reps are the ones that are willing to just learn a little bit more, get curious once again, and develop a bit of a talk track around some of the things that are coming up time and time again.
Oh my gosh, Donna, you're speaking my language. I love it. I used to just take the red lines and upload them into my legal case and be like, legal can deal with that. This year I started reading, right? What is it that they care about? And so to your point earlier around like, can my AE answer the next question? I always use my mutual plan when I am having internal conversations with my leadership to say, hey, this is what's happening in my deal review. Legal, we're stuck on, and since I read those red lines, liability caps and data residency, or something along those lines. So now I can go that one question deeper and say, this is where I need help. You need to give them the super cap or whatever the case is, because now my SVP can come over the top with legal and say, okay, we need to become a little bit more amendable here. And so I love that point about making sure that you're just going and understanding our stance and making sure that you're reading those red lines, because I'd be willing to bet there's probably 80% of people out there who are just like not reading the red lines.
I love it. Love it, Lisa, because in a deal review or a forecast call and you say it's stuck in legal, you better believe as a leader, I'm going to say, what is up? What are they stuck on? And
Mhm.
that's an opportunity, to your point, as a rep to make an ask. They're stuck on this piece. I understand we normally give X. They want Y. Have you seen this before, leader?
Mhm.
What have we done in the past to address this, leader? Those types of conversations are how you will get unstuck and get things moving.
And then selfishly, it also makes you look good, right? It
Yes.
makes you look good in front of your leadership. They will trust you to close this deal. I have the biggest deal in December for our organization. And I have been in 6 weeks of deal reviews. And every week I pull up my mutual plan and I say, here we are on all of the things. We'll put the mutual plan in the show notes that I use, but I always have, this is the situation. This is the target date. These are the owners. This is when we're expecting something back, our next step. So I can speak to each one of those points in those internal conversations as well as those external conversations to say, hey, we missed X target date. Who else needs to be involved, or how do we expedite this in order to hit our next target date? So I just think it makes you such a better communicator
Yeah.
when you have a structure.
I think the analogy that comes to mind for me, and maybe it's because I'm about to do a home renovation, is if I'm a homeowner and I've hired a contractor and I come in and I just plop in every 2 weeks and I'm like, checking in, where are we at? And if that contractor can say to me, okay, here's where we are. Here's the next step. Here's where it fits within the broader rest of the project. And here's some delays that I'm anticipating, some risks that I'm anticipating. There's a lumber shortage, can't get the steel beam we need, whatever it is. I feel like, damn, this guy, he's on it. And I don't need to be on top of him every day because he's got this. I can check in once a week. And I know he has a plan that he is following. The best way to get your boss off your back is to show that you are in control,
Mhm.
you understand what needs to happen, and you got this. And I think a mutual close plan is a great way to show that.
Yeah, like this person is in control, they are credible, and I feel safe with them because they have a plan. So even as a customer, when you come out and say, "Hey, these are all the things that I heard, these are all the things that we need to do," I think that also works like both ways, right? Internally and externally, that now you are a trustworthy, credible person because you've got the plan and somebody is like, "I would follow you."
It's exactly, you took the words pretty much out of my mouth. Not only does it make you look good internally, I also want to highlight the fact that it makes you look good externally with your customers. The important piece here is we always talk about being that consultant. It really underlines to the customers not only have you done this multiple times before, you also have the knowledge behind it to make the recommendations and showcase what needs to happen. So for me, internally and externally, these mutual action plans just help you to get what you need and pretty much close your deals faster.
Yeah, absolutely love it. Okay, so far we talked about procurement, we talked about legal, we talked about IT and security. We're going to talk about the signer. If you don't know who is signing your deal, like if you're about to send out the DocuSign and you say, "What's the signer's email?" You are behind, and you've also missed an opportunity for some executive alignment there as well. So even if you find out, "Hey, who's the signer?" and then your team reaches out and says, "Hey, listen, I'm here just to support you. I understand that you are the one who's going to help us close this deal." You've missed that opportunity there. So you need to find out who your signer is, what the dollar threshold is for them to be signing, what else needs to happen before signing, and who that person is going to be.
One way that I've approached this as a leader is I actually have gone to the client and said, I appreciate you are an executive sponsor for this implementation. I'm an executive sponsor internally myself for you. I would love to develop a relationship before it becomes a contractual one, because I find if things don't go the way you need them to, we need to have a relationship and a foundation to build upon. And that's why I would love to connect with you before we come together as business partners. I think having that conversation beforehand is so critical, and it should not be treated like optional. It is an ask that I think is very justified if you position it in a way that is mutually beneficial. You want one throat to choke? I'm your person. If something goes wrong, I'm your person. And I think there's a benefit to that.
I loved the point of like, I want to develop a relationship before it's contractual, right? Like, I don't want to be forced into this relationship. I want you to feel comfortable with me before you invest millions of dollars into our organization. So we got to figure out who that signer is, make sure that there's some executive alignment. The last piece is implementation. And what I have found is that by including this in the mutual plan, and it doesn't need to be as detailed, it just needs to say, here are the key dates and here's how long each of these implementation components are going to take. If you sign on X day, we will be done on this day. And what that does is it keeps you time bound. And so I just ran into this. I didn't have implementation on my mutual plan. So a couple of months ago, I'm closing this deal. And as they were getting closer to the signature date, they were like, "Oh, I think it's going to be pushed." And then we had to come back and say, "Oh, if it gets pushed, then you're going to be pushed into another cohort for implementation. You might not hit your implementation date." I just feel like that is more shady than saying, "Hey, folks, this is what implementation looks like. You sign on X day, you'll be put into this cohort. These are all the things that need to get done. This is the day that you go live." And everything is there in black and white so that if we do start to push, we can go back to that executive that Donna just met and say, "Hey, here's what we're working toward. And these are some of the obstacles that we're finding. I see risk here because you folks need to go live on this date and you might not get into that cohort. Like, let's jump on a call." But I just find that putting the implementation component inside your mutual plan is just so important.
I agree completely, Lisa. And I just you said it and I want to repeat it because it is really important. The last date on this mutual close plan is not the signature date, people. Get out of your sales head. It's not about you and when you're getting your commission check. It is about implementation and when they can go live. It's about your client, your customer. The go live date is the last date.
What did we talk about today? We talked about a new and improved mutual plan. I loved that we saw it from 3 different levels, right? The individual contributor, I want to get the deal signed. Sarita, you want to get the deal signed as a leader, but you also have some other points like, hey, you got to get to yes first. And then Donna, you talked about, hey, you need to be using this internally and externally so that I know and I have confidence that you are going to get this closed. We talked about procurement. We talked about legal and what you can do to get them on a call. We talked about IT and security, what questions to ask them, because there might be a few security review boards that you need to go through and you need to understand what that process looks like. We also talked about asking, hey, is there a person in there that sits between the business and IT and a liaison that can help out with this? We talked about who is your signer and making sure that you have executive alignment early before a contract signature date. And then we talked about implementation and how important it is to make sure that it is on your mutual success plan so that you can point to it to say, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, you need to sign on this date or we're going to miss your go live date. So I will put everything into the show notes, but really hope you folks enjoyed this today. We enjoyed putting it together for you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Sales Squad Pod. We're building a community of serious sellers and leaders who want to operate at the next level, and we're glad you're part of it. If you found value in today's conversation, we would love to hear from you. Send us questions you'd like us to tackle in future episodes, and whether you're listening on Apple or Spotify, be sure to hit like, follow, and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can also find us on Instagram and YouTube at Sales Squad Pod.